Welcome to the AI Policy Podcast, a podcast by the Wadhwani AI Center at CSIS. I'm Gregory C. Allen.
And I'm Andrew Schwartz.
Join us as we dive into the world of AI policy, where we will discuss the implications of this transformative technology and what governments around the world are doing about it.
To get to the truth of the matter about the Chinese AI company DeepSeek that's making all these waves, I'm joined by my colleague Gregory C. Allen, who's the director of the Wadhwani AI Center here at CSIS, also co-host of the AI Policy Podcast that I co-host with him. Greg, it's great to see you. We've had a mind-blowing couple days. We're talking on the Tuesday, the 28th in the afternoon. On Inauguration Day, January 20th, the Chinese AI company DeepSeek released its DeepSeek R1 model. Before we dive into why this model is so special, can you give us some background on the company and where they came from?
So for folks who are not living and breathing AI policy and AI industry news all day, every day, you might be asking that exact question, like, what the heck is DeepSeek? Because we're familiar with Chinese tech giants like Alibaba, like Baidu, like Tencent. Some of these companies are strong even in America, and they're definitely Goliaths in China. But DeepSeek is a comparative unknown. And that's because the company is actually owned by High Flyer Capital Management. It's a quantitative trading firm. I mean, their original exposure to machine learning was creating those like high frequency trading algorithms that have been exciting and, were like detailed in the Michael Lewis book a long time ago.
In the flash trading book.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So they started out as a quantitative firm, but now they are all in on artificial general intelligence. They are doing frontier AI model research, and it has been crystal clear for about 6 months now that they are the top shop in all of China. So it is kind of remarkable if you think about this startup that, at least this subsidiary is a startup that came out of nowhere and is not just like better than Baidu, not just better than Tencent and Alibaba, but a lot better. And now people are asking, oh my gosh, are they better than OpenAI? Oh my gosh, are they better than Anthropic? Now, I think the answer there is no, but they definitely are better at some things. And this paper...
And they're knocking on the door.
Exactly. And this paper includes a lot of technical details. And I've talked to folks at those companies, and they say, we read this paper and we learned a lot. There is a lot of interesting technological innovations here. Yes, there's some stuff that they discovered and replicated that we had already invented and sort of kept to ourselves. But there's also some stuff that they clearly developed indigenously and is legitimately technologically impressive. So this company, which, again, I had never heard of them 2 years ago. 6 months ago, I started hearing about them a lot. And literally all day, every day, for about the past week, I've been knee-deep in DeepSeek commentary.
All right, so one of the questions that's on the tip of everybody's tongue is, did DeepSeek steal intellectual property from us, from American companies? That's one of the first things that came to my mind. Was this another cyber op that they did where they stole intellectual property and they capitalized on it?
Yeah, so I think everyone is familiar with a slogan, you could almost call it, which was ubiquitous in the conversation around China circa, a decade ago. The line that you would hear all the time is, quote, China can't innovate, they can only copy. If there's anybody listening to this podcast who still believes that, what are you doing with your life?
Yeah.
They are clearly capable of indigenous innovation. If you go to NeurIPS, if you go to the other leading AI technical conferences, Chinese researchers have been there for the better part of a decade, and they've been doing great work for the better part of a decade. Now, you asked, did they steal this? And I'm going to say that in some parts of the story, the answer is almost certainly yes. But I doubt it was some kind of very sophisticated state-backed cyber espionage campaign. Rather, what I think they did is they found a way to interact with the ChatGPT system, and then they logged those interactions on a massive scale and used it as training data for their own model, which I think is important. So on the one hand...
And cheaper.
Yes. Well, there are things here that would be, if true, which I think they probably are, definitely a violation of the ChatGPT terms of service. And you could argue, right, that they're sort of stealing intellectual property. But that is, on the one hand, true, but also, if you only focus on that, you are missing the point. On top of that, there is a ton of legitimate technological innovation revealed in these technical papers, which they've published openly. You can see how DeepSeek did what they did. Now, the part that I think is copied from American firms relates to this. If you ask DeepSeek, what AI model are you? 4 out of 5 times it'll tell you, I'm ChatGPT. How can I help? Right? And the specific mechanism whereby that would likely happen is, when you and I talk to ChatGPT, we're doing it like one conversation at a time. But if you hook up to the back end of ChatGPT, the API, you can talk to ChatGPT like 1 million questions at a time. This is what, ChatGPT sells to its enterprise customers, like somebody like, a bank who wants to hook up ChatGPT to answer customer queries, right? They're doing millions of conversations at a time. Well, it appears to be the case that DeepSeek found a way to access that API, which is not supposed to be available in China, but they would access it outside of China, and then have lots of questions. But rather than questions oriented around, DeepSeek's business use case, they were focusing on how do we harvest the most valuable training data from ChatGPT. So ChatGPT had to train on the entire internet as its training data, and then it sort of did a lot of mathematical refining of that data set to distill, what now is the ChatGPT model that it's serving to customers. But if you interact with ChatGPT, that represents all that hard work that OpenAI has already done. And if you interact with it at the scale of millions of interactions, that's now actually a pretty decent sized training data set, at least for fine tuning and certain other types of, technical use cases. And because when you ask DeepSeek, what model are you? It says I'm ChatGPT. That appears to be, exactly how this is going. Now, that has really important implications for the business model of AI models in general. I don't think this is precisely what the story is here, but I do want to just sort of frame what the worst case scenario would be, because it's worth sort of, throwing it out there. The worst case scenario would be that developing leading AI models is a bit like discovering pharmaceuticals, because the cost of discovering a pharmaceutical
is everything.
It's not just the cost of the clinical trial that worked. It's the cost of all the clinical trials that didn't work.
It's all the R&D.
Exactly. And then the cost of manufacturing pharmaceuticals is usually pennies.
Sure.
Right? So the cost of discovering,
and the cost of ingredients isn't expensive either.
Exactly. So the cost of, discovering blockbuster drugs like, blood pressure medication or, whatever the case may be, the development cost is huge. The manufacturing cost is nothing, which means if you don't have intellectual property protection, if somebody can just copy, they look at the drug molecule and they say, we're going to make this, then they get almost all of the benefit. They incur almost none of the cost, and your business model is completely doomed. So the worst case scenario here would be that OpenAI, ChatGPT, Anthropic Claude, Google Gemini, China is in a position where they can just interact with that model, harvest a lot of training data from it, and basically they now know what is, quote unquote, in this analogy, the drug molecule that works. And they incurred almost none of the research and development costs, and they can do that again and again and again. And that would basically take, what is the economic incentive of investing something like a Stargate, a $500 billion AI infrastructure project? And that then begs the question, wait, are we going to spend $500 billion so that China can give it away to the world for free?
Yeah.
And that we can, recoup none of our investment?
That's why this is so dangerous. It's one of the reasons why this is a huge issue in the United States, both from a business case standpoint and a national security standpoint.
That is why, NVIDIA's stock is down 17%.
Back up today, though. We're talking on the 28th.
Yeah.
And, I think they're recouping about at least half of what they lost yesterday.
So I think in the long run, the stock market is based on truth.
Yeah.
In the short run, the stock market is based on vibes.
But we don't. but part of this, Greg, isn't it, is that we don't really know what the truth is yet.
Exactly.
Because the companies have built up, this expectation that we're going to pour billions and billions of dollars into this. We're going to be ahead of China. We're going to do what we need to do to win. And this poked some holes in it, maybe.
Yeah, I think at a minimum, what you would say is it added uncertainty to the equation.
Sure.
So, 100% chance of $1 trillion is worth more than an 85% chance of $1 trillion.
Sure.
And so just by tamping down the certainty, it seemed that NVIDIA's position was unassailable. It seemed that OpenAI's position was unassailable. I still think they're in a pretty good position.
100%.
But you have to admit there's uncertainty in the equation that's added, and I think the stock market is digesting that uncertainty.
I'd stand by, and I think most Americans are going to stand by our companies above all, and their powers of innovation and their powers of, really moving the ball forward.
Mm-hmm.
But today, I heard, and again, we're talking on the 28th on Tuesday, I heard Elon Musk's AI safety guru, Hendricks, on CNN.
Mm-hmm.
He was asked, are the United States and China now tied when it comes to AI?
Mm-hmm.
And he said, yes, we are, which surprised me a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think you feel that way, do you?
No, I don't. And here's the way I would think about it. I mentioned that DeepSeek has legitimate technical innovations revealed in this paper, some of which are just incredibly impressive, what they pulled off. But fundamentally, 100% of their innovation was on the architectural side and on the algorithmic side. And as I said, they published the paper. You can see exactly how they did it. And what that comes down to is they found a more efficient method of wringing more intelligence, more, for lack of a better word, IQ points out of a given quantity of computational resources. So if you apply the DeepSeek methodology algorithmically, architecturally, you're getting more IQ points per GPU chip processing hour of time. Well, that's great and all, and it's a big plus up. One of the estimates I saw said it's like something like a 40x multiplier in terms of just how much more efficient they are.
40x.
40x, big number. Well, assume that's true, right? DeepSeek gets to apply that 40x multiplier off their comparatively small allocation of computer chips. OpenAI, Google, Anthropic, etc. They get to apply that 40x multiplier across their astonishing mountain of computer chips. And so one way of thinking about this is like DeepSeek, the way in which they get to benefit is they're raising the floor of AI capabilities, right? How much can you accomplish with a relatively modest amount of computation? But OpenAI and Anthropic, they get to do that. They get to benefit from all that entire thing. I don't think it's an accident that Sam Altman said that the price for O3, which is the model that blew the doors off everybody in December of 2024, where, the O1 performance was interesting, but O3 is looking shockingly good. Well, that performance boost for O3, Sam Altman has now said, how much is that going to cost you? It's going to be free. So the basic point is that efficiency multiplier, it's 100% available to OpenAI and everyone else. They get to benefit from it equivalently. That's what the floor of computational capabilities looks like. But there's also the ceiling of computational capabilities, right? OpenAI has still been using GPT-4 as its base model. O1, O3, those are all sort of conversions of the GPT-4 base model into a reasoning model, which does generate better performance. But what we haven't had yet is a massive training run to create a new base model, new GPT-5. And the point here is if we have this 40x multiplier, we're going to apply that to our base model. So GPT-5 and jaw-dropping amounts of performance improvement, OpenAI and Anthropic are in a position, China was in a position to use that to catch up. But we have that exact same advantage, and we're now able to apply it to pull ahead. And so I think these companies are going to be delivering really impressive capabilities in the not too distant future.
And quick advancements.
Yes.
So, Greg, I got to ask you, why did the release of this, I think I know, and it's really fascinating, but I really want to know in your words, why did the release of DeepSeek R1 model spark such a massive response, both from U.S. policymakers and also from our stock market?
I mentioned, how it's bringing in all of this uncertainty because, it comes right around the same time frame that OpenAI is, announcing this massive investment. And they're sort of saying, the justification for this investment is this is what it takes to compete at the frontier. And here we have DeepSeek coming up with a model that is broadly comparable to what is the current state of the art, at least as it's available to consumers. And not in every domain, but in a lot of domains, especially stuff like coding and mathematics. So O1, which OpenAI announced in September of 2024, it's not the best model that OpenAI has. As I mentioned, they have O3, but that's not available to the public yet. And suddenly, something that is almost as good as O1 is available and it's public. And what's really interesting is DeepSeek is especially good at, distilling the model into smaller and smaller versions. And so you lose a little bit of performance when you have a smaller model, but there are versions of DeepSeek that can run on your laptop. And that is really interesting. This entire paradigm of, okay, if we're going to run really good AI models, we need a, $45,000 NVIDIA GPU, or we need a data center full of billions of dollars worth of those GPUs.
And actually, all you need is a laptop.
Exactly. But as I said, that's raising the floor of capabilities. And there still is the ceiling. If you talk to folks like Dario Amodei, he's talking about what if you had a data center that was full of tens of thousands of Albert Einstein quality geniuses, and they can work all day, every day on any problem you want to throw at them. That's what the ceiling of capabilities looks like. And because of the chip export controls, that's going to be a ceiling that's really tough for DeepSeek to match. What do I mean by that? The reason why DeepSeek is in the position they're in is because of the lagging impact of export controls. When you apply export controls, you're cutting off what they can buy in the future. You don't magically make everything they've already bought disappear.
And we've been pretty clear, the United States, that we're not giving them all the goods.
Exactly. But here's the kicker. In October of 2022, the original chip export controls, there were performance specifications for what types of chips are allowed to be sold, what types of chips are not allowed to be sold. And it involved both processing power and interconnect speed. The Biden administration's hypothesis was that this would force Chinese customers to have to buy the last generation of NVIDIA chips.
Keep them a level behind us.
Exactly. And by the way, keep them there as we continue marching forward into the future. Well, it turns out that NVIDIA had already built all this compartmentalization into their chips. And the reason why they did that is for recoverability in the face of manufacturing defects. If there's a manufacturing defect, you'd much rather it just deactivate a given compartment than break the entire chip. So they had already designed all this functionality into their chips. And what NVIDIA discovered is that they could use that exact same functionality to degrade the interconnect speed of the chips to below the export control thresholds. So instead of forcing Chinese AI customers to buy, multiple generations old of NVIDIA chips, they could actually buy the latest and greatest NVIDIA chips, with just a modest penalty in interconnect speed. And DeepSeek, they said that they trained this model specifically using those H800 chips. We in America, we use the H100, which is the full performance. The H800 is just the exact same chip, but NVIDIA blows a fuse to deactivate, one of those compartments, and therefore it doesn't have the same interconnect speed. And between October 2022 and October 2023, it was fully legal to sell those chips to China. And so DeepSeek bought an awful lot of them. So did other customers. I've looked through NVIDIA's financial statements, and for the fiscal year ended January 2024, they sold $10 billion worth of chips to China. So that covers the entire period where H800s were legal to sell to China. DeepSeek and others, of course, they stockpiled those chips. So right now, we are living through the lagging impact of the poor design of the original package of export controls. But in the not too distant future, we will be living through the lagging impact of the updated export controls that came in October 2023. And to a certain extent, we already are living through the impact. Here's what I mean by that. DeepSeek has halted new signups of customers. So if you didn't sign up for DeepSeek, last week, you can't sign up this week. They're claiming that that's the result of a cyber attack. I give that claim almost no credence whatsoever. I think the far more likely scenario is that they are constrained on chips, because there's a big difference between having enough chips to train an AI model and having enough chips to serve that AI model to 300 million customers a week, which is what OpenAI has to do. I think OpenAI has stated publicly that around 80% of their computing workload at this stage goes towards inference. Whereas, 2 years ago, it looked like training was the dominant driver of computing workloads. But now, if you really want to scale these things up, it's inference. And so what DeepSeek had is enough computing power to serve those models, to a handful of customers. But when they became the number one app in a bunch of app stores and millions of customers suddenly wanted to use DeepSeek, the whole system crashed. And I don't think that's an accident. So when they made the purchases in that October 2022 to October 2023 period, they made those purchases based on their estimates for their training needs. But now they would love to buy a lot more chips for their inference needs, and they're encountering the export controls. So it's not just me, saying that export controls are a massive barrier to DeepSeek's future. The CEO of DeepSeek has said this. He said in an interview in the middle of 2024, the number one challenge his company is facing is these export controls. And I take him seriously. I think he's right.
Sure. Okay. Well, on the other side of this, how are the leading U.S. AI companies reacting to the release of DeepSeek's R1?
So it's interesting. I mean, both Sam Altman and Jack Clark of Anthropic, people are congratulating DeepSeek. And they're pointing out that, as I said, there is legitimate technical innovation in these papers. Sam Altman has basically said, and we're going to release better models. And as I said before, we're going to give them away for free, right, at the lower case, which right now, the tippy top of what OpenAI can do and costs $2,000 a month. Because of this, they've decided to make it free. And then they're going to go beyond that. And if you pay that $2,000 a month, you're going to get much, 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 much more than this. So I think that this sort of points to the next turns of the scaling crank. What does it look like if the AI scaling laws continue and we continue to go from the leading AI clusters are 100,000 chips to the leading AI clusters are 1 million chips to the leading AI clusters are 10 million chips. Now, DeepSeek, they're using the Hopper series of chips, the H800s. But NVIDIA is coming out with the Blackwells in not too long. And the year after that, there's going to be the successor to the Blackwells. And that is all a computer chip future that is going to bring about, even more performance. And whereas, as I said, all of DeepSeek's advantages in algorithm and architecture, those are available to OpenAI. Those are available to Google. But what's happening next with the Blackwell chips that NVIDIA is coming out with all this other stuff, that's not going to be available to DeepSeek. And so I think there's a really important point here about DeepSeek is legitimately impressive, but the reason why this is happening right now, the reason why they released that paper on Trump's inauguration day, which I refuse to believe is a coincidence, is because they're trying to send a signal to U.S. policymakers and to U.S. allies. They want to say these export controls don't work. Whatever barriers you put in front of us, we're going to blast right through them, and you should just give up on that strategy. But if we gave up on that strategy, we'd be giving them exactly what they want, exactly what they need. And I think that'd be a terrible mistake.
And we're not going to give up on that strategy.
I certainly hope not, but who knows?
Well, I want to ask you about the Trump administration and their response. But before I do that, I want to point out that legendary tech investor Mark Andreessen said that this is a Sputnik moment. This is the launch of the AI race between the U.S. and China. Do you feel that way?
Well, there was a response that came from one of the former CEOs of Reddit. And he said that, Sputnik was a proof of concept, right?
Right.
They did something and we're like, oh, they can do that.
And we saw it.
But this is different because Sputnik, the Soviets did not give away the blueprints. They did not give away the technical documents. And DeepSeek has done that. Now, this model is being described in the press as an open source model, but that's not true. It's an open weights model. If it was an
What's the difference?
If it was an open source model, they would have released all the training data.
I see.
And then I wouldn't be suspecting that they harvested data in violation of the terms of service from ChatGPT. I would be pointing to the specific training data where they in fact did that. But I think that's why they didn't open source it, because if they open sourced it, everybody would know factually, this is exactly how they've done it. But I think we can infer it from the evidence that we have. So this is different, from Sputnik in that they're giving away all of this point. And that's why we're going to be able to replicate those advantages and those breakthroughs so easily.
So, Greg, finally, I want to ask you, how does the Trump administration, who, again, as you point out, it landed on their heads on Inauguration Day. What do they have to say about it?
Well, so Donald Trump has already made a statement about DeepSeek, which I think is noteworthy. And he basically says that it was a wake-up call to the U.S. AI industry. And I think that that's something that I've been saying for a while now. Yeah. We should not assume for a second that leadership in AI is guaranteed, right? It is not our birthright. We have to go out there and earn it every single day. And if it hadn't been China, it would have been somebody else, right? This is a critical technology, critical to the future of leadership in the world, has economic impacts, has military impacts, has frankly diplomatic and global leadership type impacts.
Health impacts. I mean, you can go
Exactly.
on and on.
And so we have to go out there and earn it every single day. And Chinese competitors, I mean, I've known it just from seeing, what comes out of the leading AI conferences, who goes there, who publishes great papers. But I do think, President Trump is right to say it's a wake-up call. Now, on the point about like the stock market impacts of all of this, Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella had a post where he said, this is just the Jensens Paradox all over again.
Yeah, tell us about that.
So I think this is really important. The Jensens Paradox dates back to an economist in the Industrial Revolution in 19th century Britain. And what he pointed out is, hey, steam engines keep getting more and more efficient at generating energy from coal. So you might think, okay, we're increasing the efficiency, we're decreasing the amount of coal that we need to perform a given task. However, demand for Britain, the country, for coal is going through the roof. So how is it that efficiency is going up, but demand is also going up? And the Jensens Paradox is sort of the reconciliation of that, which points out that as you get more efficient at using an input good, well, you strengthen the return on investment for using that good. And the Jensens Paradox, was originally pointed out for coal and steam engines, but that is the entire history of the computer industry. Literally, right now, the computer chips we have are more than 100 trillion times more efficient than the computers that we were using in the 1940s when they were first invented.
Yeah.
So you might think, okay, so maybe there's just one computer and it effortlessly services all the computer needs of Earth and it does so for a fraction of a penny. No, that's not how history came out. Instead, we're spending literally trillions of dollars on computers, but we're doing way, 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 way more things with computers than we were doing in the 1940s. And so when people say, oh my gosh, NVIDIA is doomed, look at DeepSeek. Well, look, there's the short term and there's the long term. In the short term, vibes might be enough, right? If investors get spooked by DeepSeek, whether rightly or wrongly, if they get spooked and OpenAI cancels Stargate, yeah, that's going to affect NVIDIA's near-term bottom line. But over the long term, what Jensens Paradox suggests is that if you make computing more efficient, it makes it more attractive to invest in computing.
Right.
And so NVIDIA, they're going to be fine. Now, there is a bit of a question.
And Microsoft's going to be fine because they need more. I mean, this whole thing that the Magnificent Seven, so-called Magnificent Seven companies are, down and out over this, I think is the furthest thing from the truth.
Yeah, I mean, different companies might be different winners and losers. We talked at the beginning about how OpenAI and Anthropic, they're going to have to prove how everything that they invent isn't going to be immediately harvested by their competitors for a fraction of the cost. So the story might be different for different segments of the value chain. Similarly, like Apple, when you use a GPU on your phone, that GPU is not made by NVIDIA, that GPU is designed by Apple. And so if DeepSeek, this efficiency gain that they've demonstrated means that a lot of beefy AI capabilities that maybe used to have to run in the cloud can now run on your phone, well, in that specific market segment, it might be bad news for NVIDIA, but it'll be great news for Apple. So there will be sort of, potential for different winners and losers. But overall, I think American companies are going to do just fine.
Greg, as always, really appreciate the insight. We will, of course, keep talking about this on the AI Policy Podcast and right here on The Truth of the Matter. So thanks again.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the AI Policy Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. We also love to hear from you, so reach out at aipolicypodcast@csis.org with your suggestions and feedback. Finally, don't forget to visit our website, csis.org, for our latest research reports and events. This podcast was produced by Sarah Baker, Isaac Goldston, and Sadie McCullough. See you next time.